And I have to sort of sit people down and relate to them that we had Magna Carta, we had a Bill of Rights of our own, and British people fought the bombs of the Luftwaffe in order to be able to preserve them. And nevertheless, a couple of decades down the road, with the applause of the press, these things were burnt. Because it really doesn't matter what the principles are, because they're just pieces of paper. What matters is the extent to which the people whose job it is to defend those freedoms are actually genuinely interested in doing so rather than doing something else.
Most grown-ups, we need to know how to handle things we don't like as grown-ups. So a university is a great place to practice being open-minded and critical and learning how to debate with your words, not your fists or your tears. Now, of course, in reality, universities are very unfree. They often have speech codes, restrictions. They are a political monoculture where left-wing groups get university funding and left-wing guest speakers are brought in and entire faculties of left-wing activism pretend to be scholarship, but conservatives are demonized, defunded.
What matters, and that's what our analysis has shown, is a culture, is a climate. And if your climate has three specific characteristics, that means your politicians are definitely going to start restricting your free speech.
And what are those three qualities that would lead us to lose our freedom of speech?
The first thing that one can notice is a subtle change in values. What we observe is that the yardstick of the validity of an opinion ceases to become veracity. It ceases to become truth and becomes instead the sort of emotional response that is elicited by the view. So 20 years ago in the UK, if you disagreed with someone, you said that's a lie. Now you say that's offensive, and that is deemed to be a rebuttal. That all contributes to the idea that opinions are dangerous.
But what's been happening for the last several years is that students and student governments are trying to shut down free speech, the free exchange of ideas, and make sure only their views are heard. Well, on Monday at Carlton University here in Ottawa, a large board dubbed the Free Speech Wall and placed there by the Carlton Students for Liberty was ripped down by a young man that calls himself a human rights activist. Arun Smith is likely enjoying his 15 minutes of fame and his chance to showcase his totalitarian mindset where he and a few others decide what proper thought and speech are. Smith said that he did this because he saw free speech, the Free Speech Wall, as an act of violence.
Even that little freedom act was too much for this politically correct swamp of a university. The university immediately sent a bureaucrat by to inspect the wall after someone had written, get this, traditional marriage is awesome, unquote. Seriously. And by the way, that was the most offensive thing written on the wall at that time. But then a freaky fascist decided he just couldn't stand all this free talking. Arun Smith, a 7th year human rights major, seriously, just savor those words for a moment. A kid who has been studying a field of study called human rights for 7 years. Oh, and with a minor in sexuality studies. Can you believe that? He decided he couldn't stand this free speech, so he just ripped down the wall. And he boasted about it on his Facebook page. I'm going to read from that Facebook page at length just to give you a taste of the full-on crazy. I've got to cut it down from its rambling length, but here are some of the highlights. I'm quoting from Arun Smith's. He said, to the Carlton community, this evening, acting alone and in an act of forceful resistance, I removed the Carlton Students for Liberty's free speech wall from the Unicenter Galleria. We live in a world built on meaningless platitudes, one where abstract ideology seems to trump considerations for humanity. We rely on buzzwords like free speech to help us either ignore or perpetuate the gross suffering that our words and actions can cause. In organizing the free speech wall, the Students for Liberty have forgotten that liberty requires liberation, and this liberation is prevented by providing space for either more platitudes or for the expression of hate. I'm quoting this nutbar at length here. We're supposed to be creating safer spaces for ourselves and for other students, but there can be no safer spaces where there is potential for triggering the invalidation or questioning of the identities of others and or the expression of hatred, getting dizzy, must take break. That's what this moral giant wrote. It goes on, but I will not force it on you now.
And it feeds into the second thing, which is a redefinition of the concept of incitement, which was originally the only exception that we allowed. Anglo-Saxon institutions have always valued free speech, but we allowed this exception called incitement. You go and rob that bank. You go and murder that man. but we've changed judicially, legislatively, the definition of incitement to hatred, to incitement to religious hatred, to incitement to racial hatred. Yeah. And you can see this once again with the torching of the embassies. You and I both know, everyone in the human race knows that if someone burns down the embassy, the only person responsible is the person who holds the match, or possibly the cleric who says, go and burn down that embassy. But because we've disentangled this deterministic notion of free will, responsibility starts to become in the direction where the most people are pointing.
When you hear what he has to say and then look at his actions, they don't match. Here's part of his campaign video to get elected to the Carlton student government. He clearly says he wants every voice heard.
I want to let you know that I am here so that I can make a difference in terms of creating inclusive, open spaces that are safe spaces, where every voice is empowered and where every student's voice is heard.
So if he wants every voice heard, why is he shutting down a free speech wall that was very supportive of his key issue, gay rights? Well, the answer lies in one of his other phrases, safe spaces.
I quoted from your Facebook page where you have unlimited free speech. How would you feel if someone shut down your Facebook page the same way you shut down this free speech board on campus?
Well, there's a difference, and I'll
explain. Why, other than it's you? I mean, why should you be exempt from censorship when you're trying to censor others?
You know, Ezra, in the preamble to this discussion, you said we wouldn't talk over each other.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm happy to respect that agreement if you are.
Go ahead.
Where the difference is, and I would be more than open to my spaces being shut down and my spaces being appropriately safeguarded if what I was saying was fundamentally offensive, oppressive, triggering, or hateful.
But aren't those subjective definitions? I mean, some strict fundamentalist Christians, for example, would surely find some of your gay rights activism offensive. I mean, isn't offensive highly subjective? We can all be offended by different things.
Well, sure, Ezra, but you need to let me finish an answer if you're going to ask a question. So we need to, I understand that Sun News is losing $17 million a year, but that's not an excuse to cut people off. So what we need to look at very clearly is what the context in which words are being said is and how those words are socially informed. Every part of our society...
That's just bafflegab. What does that mean in the real world?
If you'd let me finish to answering the question, I would answer the question completely. But if you're going to interrupt, then I'll just stop talking.
Well, I'm just trying to find out what offensive means, because when you use it to describe things you don't like. But I'm saying there are some people who wouldn't like what you say, and you're saying, but that's not what I mean by offensive. And you say you don't like hate, but you hate bigots. I'm just trying to figure out, is there anyone who gets to decide these things, Arun, other than you?
Sure, and this is what I said. It's a collective responsibility, and when I talk about a collective responsibility, that means we're operating on a social and societal level, right?
And the third and the final quality is something very disturbing that happens to the media. And this is what's very much happened to America in the last 2 weeks. The media starts to become less and less about giving more information, more opinion, more views, and about restricting them. And it starts to have an obsession with people's motives. There was a very instructive interview last week, I think, with one of your favored guests, Pamela Geller, on CNN, about her subway posters. And the fascinating thing was the journalist just asked the same question over and over again. What are your motives? What are your real motives for doing this? I know you're free to do this, but should you? And what all this does is it contributes to a political environment in which politicians start saying, well, what would be the harm? Right. What would be the harm in restricting free speech? Right. Surely free speech is dangerous, and it would be less harm to restrict it. And why I came to America is to tell people that there are horrendous harms that will come down the road if America is not careful.
I don't want to leave the area here.
I know, but what we're trying to do here is create this a little more safer environment. Right. Clearly, whatever.
But why would you take me away? Because my hands are in my pockets. Okay. I'm not shouting at anyone. How come I'm being taken away?
Clearly, your engagement with the people here that are protesting.
I'm the lawful one, though, aren't I?
I think at this moment, everyone is lawful. Okay. But what's happening here, clearly, you're agitating a lot of people. There are a lot of people upset with you.
So if I got more upset, would you take them away?
Well, you are one, and that makes
It's easier for you. So this is about what's easy for you.
Well, it's easier for society, right? We all want to
Well, it's
get
not
along.
easier for my freedom of speech, though, is
Well,
it?
no, it isn't. But when you're going to aggravate a group of people like that, we're going to
giving a veto to the angry people.
Words in my mouth. We're going to ask you politely to just move on. Have your
And
ways
if I
of
don't, will you
speaking, but
arrest
not-
me?
Have your ways of speaking, but not aggravate 100 people.
Will you arrest me if I don't?
Is that what you're choosing? You're choosing to stay here and aggravate these people?
I'm
Put it
asking
back to you, sir. Is this what you're choosing?
You know what?
I'm putting it back to you, sir. Let's all think with a clear head. You're aggravating a lot of people. It's getting very heated, and then that
but
becomes
that's not
a problem
the test.
for us.
It's not against
The
the law to
test
be
is when-
aggravating, is
the
it?
test
Thank
is-
God.
The test is when you aggravate a lot of people, and then it does become unlawful.
Really? Is aggravating against the law?
Sir, look,
What
everybody's
section of the
upset.
criminal code?
Sir, everybody's upset. We don't need a quiz on the sidewalk. Clearly, we're going to
If
talk
you're going to
human
arrest me,
behavior.
go ahead and
Let's
arrest
talk
me.
about
No,
human
seriously,
behavior.
go ahead and arrest me.
Patronizing Dumb and Dumber.
Now, here's why you should care about this. Even if you're not in university, you don't have kids in university or grandchildren in university, you need to care about this. These people, the Arun Smiths of the world and the folks on the student government that want to control speech they disagree with, will one day be running this country. Believe me, these folks will be the politicians, the bureaucrats and administrators that run our cities and towns, provincial and federal departments, and the malformation that their minds are undergoing right now, well, that'll be carried over into their later life. Would you even recognize Canada if these clowns were in charge? That's why these stories matter. This is why we need to name and shame them, shine a light onto their silliness. It's not only the right thing to do, our future depends on it. And that's the byline.
I mean, I recognize some of them from Occupy Toronto, from the Afghan girl who disrupted the Remembrance Day ceremony in November. Like, it's just the ragtag professional rent-a-mob. So, I mean, none of them were actually very passionate. They were just there for their $50 and their free bottle of wine.
You wanted everyone to have the same rights to free speech. And these safe spaces policies shut some people out. So you wanted this wall up. Students for Liberty is fairly libertarian-minded organization, correct?
It's completely libertarian.
Okay, so that you know, a lot of people put that on the right, some don't, but it's more on the right than on the collectivist mindset, I would say. So you would agree with me that most of the student body, at least the government, student government, is very left-wing at Carleton, and you wanted to give a different voice.
I can't comment on that. You know, definitely the student government is more left-wing than it's quite obvious. You can't deny that. But as for the student body, I'm not really sure if it's.
Well, yeah, what I meant was the student body politic. The guys that are running the show at CUSA, the student organization, that they are essentially left-wingers.
Yeah, but that is implying that they have principles. In my opinion, a lot of them are just really narcissistic and want to tell people how to live their lives.
You're a libertarian?
That's correct.
How happy would you be living in a country run on the principles that the Carleton student government is run on? And I'm asking on the principles that they run on, not these individuals, because maybe they'll change. But if they don't, and these sorts of people get into provincial government, they get into the federal government, and they're running Canada, what would that do to this country?
Well, if you look at history, all of the countries that have ever played with censorship as a knee-jerk reaction to opposing views have all had terrible human rights records. And if Arun Smith has been in Carleton for 7 years studying human rights, he should be able to make that correlation between human rights.
Unfortunately, I don't think he's
censorship.
doing a whole lot of studying there. Thanks so much for joining us, Ian, and best to you and Students for Liberty.